There are places in America that disappeared because time moved on. There are towns that died because industries collapsed. There are cities that faded because people simply left. But Love Canal did not disappear for any of those reasons. Love Canal vanished because it was never safe to exist in the first place. Because beneath the homes, beneath the streets, beneath the playgrounds, lay something horrifying. Not a legend, not a myth, not a story exaggerated over time, but chemicals, toxins, poison, thousands of tons of it, hidden under a town where families laughed, where children grew up, where people trusted that the ground beneath their feet was just ground. They were wrong. Love Canal, New York, was supposed to be a perfect symbol of the American suburban dream. Quiet streets, freshly painted houses, green lawns, kids riding bikes, parents proud to have a home of their own. It looked safe. It felt safe. It was never safe. And the most terrifying part? Nobody told them. They lived on top of danger for years before the truth finally broke free from the ground itself. This is not just the story of a disaster. It's the story of betrayal, of corporate greed, of government denial, of families who paid the price for something they never caused and never deserved. This is the story of Love Canal. Before Love Canal became a symbol of disaster, it was simply a place people were proud to call home. In the beginning, Love Canal didn't look like a warning. It didn't feel dangerous. There were no fences, no signs, no reason to fear. It looked like something good. A neighborhood where American families could live decent lives. A place where parents worked, kids went to school, and neighbors greeted each other over freshly cut lawns. This was supposed to be the American dream. Love Canal grew during a time when families were moving out of crowded cities. They wanted space. They wanted peace. They wanted safety. Rows of houses appeared. Schools were built. Playgrounds were filled with laughter. People planted trees, decorated porches, painted fences. They didn't just move in a Love Canal. They built lives there. Mothers walked children to school in the mornings. Fathers came home tired, but grateful to have a place to return to. Summer evenings were filled with barbecues, conversations, and the peaceful comfort of routine. This wasn't a forgotten corner of America. This was a neighborhood people believed in. Real families, real hopes, real futures being planned day by day. Nobody questioned the ground beneath them. Nobody suspected danger. Nobody imagined that the soil where their children played could be filled with chemicals from another world entirely. Because why would they? They trusted the people who built this place. They trusted the companies. They trusted the government. They trusted the promise that Love Canal was a safe place to live. As the years went by, Love Canal became a tight community. People knew their neighbors. They shared meals. They shared stories. They shared life. To the outside world, it was just another quiet American suburb. But to the people who lived here, it was home. And that's what makes what happened here so painful. Because Love Canal wasn't abandoned because people didn't care. It wasn't deserted because life moved on. It was taken from them, destroyed from underneath. Not by an accident of nature, but by human decisions, human choices, and human neglect, buried deep beneath the surface. At first, no one knew. At first, there were no signs. But poison doesn't need attention to exist. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about hope, dreams, or families. It simply waits, silent, unseen, patient, until one day, it can't be hidden anymore. And in Love Canal, that day was coming. Disasters don't always begin with explosions. Sometimes, they begin quietly. In Love Canal, the first signs of danger didn't look dramatic. They didn't look like something from a movie. They looked confusing, strange, unexplainable, and deeply unsettling. It started slowly. People noticed unusual smells in the air. A sharp chemical odor drifting through neighborhoods that were supposed to be peaceful and clean. Strange liquids began to appear in backyards. Sticky, oily, unfamiliar substances seeping up from the ground after rainstorms. Puddles that didn't look like water. Colors the earth was never meant to have. In some places, the soil itself seemed wrong. Soft where it shouldn't be. Well, when everything else was dry. Burning skin when touched. Then came something much worse. People began to get sick. Headaches, burning eyes, constant nausea, dizziness, fatigue that wouldn't go away. Children began getting rashes, mysterious burns, strange, unexplained illnesses. Pets died, plants stopped growing. Trees that had stood for years suddenly withered from the inside. And slowly, fear spread through the community. Parents started asking questions. Why is my child always sick? Why does my basement smell like chemicals? What is happening to this place? Doctors didn't have answers. Officials didn't want to listen. No one wanted to believe that something terrible could be buried beneath their homes. But the truth didn't care about denial. Rainwater began dragging chemicals upward. Snowmelt carried toxins closer to the surface. Shifts in the ground broke open the barrier between what was buried and the lives being lived above it. At school, children played outside, right above where barrels of toxic waste were buried. Some of those chemicals began leaking into the schoolyard, into playgrounds, into dirt children put their hands into every single day. Kids came home sick. Mothers took them to hospitals. Doctors treated symptoms, but not the cause, because the cause was still being hidden, still being denied, still being buried both underground and in paperwork. Soon, things became impossible to ignore. People fell seriously ill. Miscarriages happened. Birth defects appeared. Families who trusted this place began to realize it might be killing them. Residents demanded answers, but answers didn't come easily, because what was under Love Canal was darker than anyone wanted to admit. Thousands of toxic chemicals, disposal pits buried beneath the ground, barrels rusting underground until they leaked their poison into soil, water, homes, and bodies. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't nature. This was human-made, and it was only the beginning, because soon the truth would explode into the open, not because authorities wanted to reveal it, but because Love Canal would no longer allow its secret to stay buried. The poison was awake now, and it was everywhere. For a long time, Love Canal was a mystery no one wanted to solve. People were sick. Children suffered. The land itself seemed poisoned. But the question remained, why? What was happening beneath this quiet American neighborhood? The truth finally began to surface. Not because the authorities were eager to share it, but because the situation became impossible to hide. Scientists were brought in. Tests were run. Soil samples, water samples, air studies. What they found was terrifying. Beneath Love Canal, buried under layers of dirt, asphalt, lawns, and homes, lay a massive chemical dump site. Dozens of highly toxic industrial chemicals. Barrels upon barrels upon barrels of hazardous waste. Thousands of tons of poisonous material, stored in the worst place imaginable. Under a neighborhood, under families, under children. Years earlier, corporations had used this land as a dumping ground. Chemical waste was buried, sealed, and forgotten. Or at least, that's what people hoped. But time does not care about secrets. Metal rusts. Barriers break. Nature pushes back, and slowly, the poison began leaking upward, into the soil, into basements, into homes, into the bodies of innocent families who had no idea what they were living on. Documents were uncovered. Old records revealed reality. This was not an accident. This was not unknown. The danger had been buried on purpose, and then neighborhoods were built right on top of it. Developers built homes. Schools were constructed. Playgrounds were placed directly above toxic ground. And at no point did anyone warn the people who moved here. They were told Love Canal was safe. They were told there was nothing to worry about. They were lied to. The findings shocked the nation. Names of chemicals no one wanted to hear appeared in reports. Benzene, dioxin, chlorinated toxins, compounds linked to cancer, compounds that damage nervous systems, compounds that harm unborn children and permanently change lives. Families who once trusted their community suddenly felt betrayed. This wasn't just contamination. This was negligence, irresponsibility, corporate greed, government failure. Mothers cried in frustration and terror. Fathers demanded answers. Reporters flooded the area. Love Canal became national news. America looked at this quiet suburb and saw something horrifying. A neighborhood that should never have existed. A community living on top of poison. A place where hundreds of families have been put directly in harm's way. Without their knowledge, without their consent, and without protection. This was more than a scandal. This was a crime against trust. And while the truth was finally revealed, another question remained. Now that everyone knew, what happens to the people who still lived here? Where do they go? Who takes responsibility? Who saves them from the place they call home? When the truth about Love Canal finally reached the public, it did not bring comfort. It brought fear. It brought anger. It brought a sense of betrayal that cut deep into every family still living there. Because now, everyone knew the truth. Love Canal wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a chemical time bomb, and the people living here were the ones sitting on top of it. Mothers and fathers began demanding answers. How could this happen? Who allowed this? Why weren't we told? And what happens to us now? Government officials came. They inspected. They spoke. They held meetings. But words didn't heal sick children. Words didn't clean poisoned soil. Words didn't remove toxins from the air people were breathing. So the residents did something powerful. They refused to stay silent. They organized. They marched. They protested. They held signs that said, "Save our children. We want safety. We deserve to live." Love Canal became national news. Television cameras arrived. Reporters stood in the streets that once represented the American dream, now reporting on the American nightmare. The entire country watched, and for the first time, those in power could no longer look away. Tests continued. Findings grew worse. The evidence was undeniable. Love Canal wasn't just contaminated. It was dangerous. It was life-threatening, and it was only getting worse. Parents pleaded for relocation. They didn't want compensation first. They didn't want apologies. They wanted one thing: to get their families out while they still could. Eventually, after growing pressure, louder outrage, and more horrifying findings, the government had to act, and it did. Officials declared Love Canal a national health emergency, one of the first times in American history. A neighborhood was officially recognized as too dangerous for human life. And then the evacuation began, house by house, street by street, family by family. People packed their belongings. They boxed up their memories. They closed doors to homes that had once felt so full of life. Moving trucks rolled down streets that used to carry school buses and bicycles. Tears were shed at kitchen tables where families had once laughed together. Children asked questions parents struggled to answer. Why do we have to leave? Why can't we stay? What do we do wrong? And the most heartbreaking truth of Love Canal is that they did nothing wrong. They trusted. They believed. They built lives on land they were told was safe. But safety was never real here. Love Canal was evacuated. Homes emptied. Streets fell silent. The life that once filled this neighborhood was gone. This wasn't abandonment by choice. This wasn't a slow economic decline. This was evacuation to survive. An American suburb, forced to admit that it was never meant to exist. The story of Love Canal shook the nation. It changed environmental laws. It forced governments to take responsibility. It became a symbol, a warning carved into American history. A reminder that shortcuts have consequences, that greed has victims, that buried secrets don't stay buried forever. Today, Love Canal is not remembered as just another abandoned place. It is remembered as a scar, a lesson, a town sacrificed in the name of profit and denial, a place where real families lived and paid the price for something they never created. Love Canal disappeared, not because time forgot it, but because it was built on poison, and the people who once called it home had to walk away to survive.